The Battle of Fredericksburg. Once again, we see Union forces trying to achieve their goal of capturing Richmond, the Confederate capital. Union forces will be led by Burnside. You know, the one that set the style for years, sideburns.
Anyway, the Confederates knew the Union forces were coming. I mean, how could they not, right? The Union had tried it several times. The Confederates set up a trap for the Union. Union troops were slaughtered. The Union tried 6 times to beat the Confederates before retreating. 85,000 will be wounded and 15,000 will be killed.
Significance: this was one of the worst Union defeats.
All right, let's look at your blanks. Up at the top, Union forces were led by Burnside, attempted to take Richmond, and the significance was this was one of the Union's worst defeats.
Chancellorsville. Once again, we have another Union defeat. Lee and Jackson joined forces to take down the Yanks in Virginia. This really gave Lee the encouragement to push on through and invade north into Union territory.
Even though the Confederates win, they will suffer a devastating loss. Thomas Stonewall Jackson will be shot by one of his own men. This is called friendly fire. You see, the story goes that Jackson was riding back into camp after dark. The guard on duty didn't recognize Jackson and fired thinking he was the enemy.
Jackson was only shot in the arm, his left arm. You see, the common solution for every gunshot wound was amputation. Lee sent a message to Jackson. Tell him to get well and come back as soon as he can. He has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right. Unfortunately, Jackson caught pneumonia, and 8 days after losing his arm, he died.
The significance of Chancellorsville, the Confederate losses, the significance of Chancellorsville. The Confederate loses one of its finest generals and head north to engage in one of the worst battles of the Civil War.
Would you like that quote?
I did.
Okay.
Oh.
Here it should be advances in north into Union territory, and here by own man, he was shot by his own man and dies. And then the significance: the Confederate loses one of its finest generals and head north to engage in one of the worst battles. Gettysburg. Here it is, probably the worst battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg. Lee is feeling overconfident from his last few victories. He decides it's time to invade north and score a victory on northern soil. He just knew this would destroy northern morale and hopefully force the North to give up. The Union and Confederate forces accidentally meet when some Confederate soldiers are spotted in town searching for shoes. Both sides rush to ready themselves and meet outside of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in July of 1863.
Although the Confederate forces had had several victories, the Union was in a strong position on top of a ridge known as Cemetery Ridge. This was an advantageous position. Lee's other generals warned him to not proceed with the attack at this time, since it seemed impossible to win against such a strong Union position.
Lee goes ahead with the attack. He sends Pickett with his forces across the open field in an attempt to take the hill. Thousands died in this attempt by the Confederates. More than 40,000 will die in this battle. The Union will win.
By the way, the middle picture is an actual photograph of an area known as Devil's Den. It served as a temporary graveyard for some soldiers who fought in Gettysburg. This is still today considered one of the most haunted places in America.
The battle was one of the worst battles. The South will never again invade the North, and this is the turning point towards Northern victory. Okay, so here you should have July of 1863, have a victory on Union soil, Cemetery Ridge, more than 40,000 died, and it was one of the worst battles. The South will never again invade into Northern territory. And it is a turning point towards Northern victory. The Gettysburg Address. As a result of this terrible battle, Lincoln will dedicate a national cemetery to honor the dead at Gettysburg. I mean, think about it. This is 3/4 of the town of Flower dead in one battle. This was devastating to both the North and the South.
At this dedication, Lincoln will speak for under 3 minutes. You see, his popularity had decreased as the Union continued to lose and the war dragged on. They had actually hired another guy to be the main speaker. He spoke for over 2 hours. Lincoln was more of an afterthought. However, in the 2 minutes Lincoln spoke, he will give one of the most powerful speeches to this day. I am sure you recognize this speech. It's on the next slide. Lincoln himself thought the speech was a failure, and it was barely covered in the newspapers.
However, later it became recognized for the eloquence it truly is. You see, Lincoln believed the war was a test of whether our democratic nation could survive. Today, this speech is recognized as one of the greatest expressions of American beliefs. I know this wasn't a blank on your notes, but you need to highlight it or in some way mark it as important, because it is.
All right, at the top, Lincoln dedicates a national cemetery, and then Miss Bradley very generously left that in there. It's recognized one of the greatest expressions of American beliefs. Okay, and then here's the Gettysburg Address. Do you have?
No, we're going to say it.
Okay. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they have fought here, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. All right, there's one thing that I want to talk about here. 77 years ago, a lot of times people think that that a score is 10 years, but a score is actually 20 years. So when he says 77 years, he's talking about 87 years ago. So in case a test question asks you the amount of time, you need to know that a score is 20 years. All right, and I hope you thought of Surge of Patriotism. That is a really awesome speech.
Okay, check out this updated map. Now, there are some battles we haven't discussed. Listen, we could spend days, weeks, heck, even years studying the Civil War, but we don't have time. Hey, take back that sigh of relief I just heard you utter. You want to stop here?
Okay.